All right, welcome to the latest edition of Data in the Hallway. My name is Ray Paik, and here with my co-host Daniel, beaming in from the Netherlands, and happy to welcome a good friend of mine, Emily Kyle. Despite the background, she's normally in Austin, Texas. So welcome to have you, Emily. So wanted to schedule this episode because we have our HTAP Summit coming up in a few weeks, or about a week, as we're recording this. Wanted to talk about like events in general. Obviously, that's a big topic at a company whenever you organize your own event. So I consider Emily to be an event extraordinaire. Like I left GitLab like a while ago, but whenever I have questions, Emily's been good about humoring me and answering my questions. So uh, glad to have you, Emily. So
I'm so glad to be here. I'm
all
excited
right,
for your event. So
all right,
perfect
cool.
timing.
Yeah, yeah. So this might seem like an obvious question. Emily, you've been doing this for a long time for different companies. Why do we even do events? Like, what's the purpose, and how does it help the company or even community in case of open source?
Yeah, when you asked me this question
Hmm.
initially, it felt answer felt very obvious in that it's like, you want to connect and learn, but at the same time, I don't think everybody asked that question to begin with, and it's
Hmm.
an important question to start with of why are we trying to host something? Why are we trying to meet? Are we trying to drive leads? Are we trying to drive education initiatives? Are we trying to just get a chance for our community to connect with each other? So I think that's a really good starting place of, it depends, but also
Hmm.
like you should start with that question to figure out like how you're going to shape everything going from there. If you're just looking for a very broad audience, for example, you might do something virtual versus in person if you want something maybe more intimate that's more focused on networking, for example. So I think the short answer is to connect and learn, but more broadly, you should start with that question to actually get the most out of whatever event you're doing.
Right. Yeah, there are so many events. In a lot of ways, especially for startups, in a lot of cases, it's hard to sort of stand apart. I think that's one of the challenges. Um, um, that's one of the things. I guess it requires some sort of a soul searching. Are you having events just to have events, put a check mark on it, or like, is there a different reason or objective you're pursuing? So events, obviously in most companies are organized by marketing teams, and marketing, big thing is like you want to measure the ROI, like, what's the return for doing an event? And so what are different ways that you sort of measure success at the end of the day? That you've done a week-long event, for example, like how do you know you've been successful, or what kind of goals should you be setting?
Yeah, again, I think it derives from what your initial intention was. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
just trying to get in leads or you're trying to build awareness, it might be a registration goal or an attendance goal, things like that. There's definitely, it depends on a conference versus a self-hosted thing. If you are doing something self-hosted, you might want an audience that is a better fit for your product or community versus if you're doing, AWS reInvent, for example, it could be about just getting your name out there and like how many leads you can scan. I don't love
Mm-hmm.
scanned leads, for example, as a metric because
Yeah.
there is no quality benchmark. So I wouldn't ever want to have like metrics you could fake, for example. And I don't think
Right.
people appreciate like just a bad scam. People do appreciate, especially post COVID, like that more meaningful engagement. And so focusing
Mhm.
on things that can drive your business and the audience more value. So I think, we work together at GitLab. What we always focus on for GitLab events was not just driving what were the in-person goals, but how do we create larger value for the company as a whole? So when we would run our user conference, for example, we'd bring in people who would podcast and they would get podcasts with our speakers.
Mhm.
So not only did our speakers get the chance to go on stage and talk about their experience in their company, so we'd have that recording and they would get that visibility, but then they would get an additional visibility from that podcast we would get a little bit of traction from having our name mentioned. And so you're just kind of building up the ecosystem. So that's kind of
Hmm.
how I think about it, where it's not just that one-off interaction, it's building value for the long term. So one at like my company currently is trying to host an event, and I want to be able to create kind of evergreen content that we can use for a year in our YouTube channels, or we can gate some
Hmm.
of those videos. So it's not just about that single moment in time. And like people don't even think about these things, but if we do an in-person thing, I'm also bringing in a photographer, for example, so we can get b-roll, so we're not using like stock footage for things, and you're making
Hmm.
everything you do a little bit more, getting a little bit more value out of everything, and then creating assets that you can use for the longer term. So I think about it as not only a chance to connect with your people in your company, your community, your customers, but as creating like a content creation opportunity and like building memories.
Right. No,
That was a
I
little
love,
cheesy, but
no. I love the digital assets because, especially, I mean, we'll talk about this, about the impacts of the pandemic, which we just went through. I mean, even before the pandemic, I mean, there are reasons why people couldn't travel. Like, I mean, maybe you had, because, you have childcare issues, you couldn't leave town that week, or, um, you know, budgetary issues, like you couldn't get approval to travel. I mean, it kind of makes you feel left out because you're not there. And then if you have these like evergreen type of content that's sort of on YouTube, I mean, you're not getting 100% experience of being at the event, but you get to hear the key messages, or you get to sort of get a sense of what are the key discussion topics were. So yeah, I really like. I mean, GitLab is very unusual. I mean, they really heavily use like YouTube. So even for people that weren't there, I mean, you're still spreading the word, but they also feel like they're sort of being included. So no,
yeah,
I
I
like
love
that.
that element. I also
Yeah.
love being able to, if you're doing longer form content and a vet,
Hmm.
edit like invest in video editing, and you can create smaller digestible bits that are usable on like social media, for example, so people are
Hmm.
continually engaging with your brand, and you're getting sound bites and like different training opportunities for people.
Right. So cool. I mean, so like I think people who've known me long enough, I mean, I've been involved in like community metrics from open source, but one of the things that I've also been stressing is that not everything's quantifiable, unfortunately. Like you can't like measure everything, although, or even instrument everything. But when the event's over, like whether you're, spend a lot of money at a booth at AWS reInvent, or you just, wrapped up your own company summit. I mean, do you sort of know at the gut level, like whether this has been a good event or not, or do you wait until you see the numbers come in? Like,
I think it's both, because the
yeah,
company's not going to love when I'm just like, I had a great feeling that everybody was very happy. And,
yeah,
at the
right,
after party, everyone was celebratory. There
right,
is an energy I think you can feel in
yeah,
terms of, are people having meaningful discussions? Are people staying late? Like after, like you can barely close the doors, people just want to stay and
hmm,
hang out with you. And those things are real. Or are people like leaning forward in their seats at a talk versus on their phone? And so there's ways that you
hmm,
can visibly feel and see engagement and interaction, and those things are so valuable. I also love, the post event surveys. Like if you get good engagement on those things, I think it also shows that people were generally feeling like they want to invest in you and your brand, and like and that experience they had, and it's that continued investment. At the same
hmm,
time, like I still always track, I'll follow up on any leads and like anything in Salesforce. So I'm constantly
hmm,
checking. I'm getting the leads in as soon as possible and handing off things to sales, because you will not be able to invest in large things unless you are getting that like
hmm,
on paper ROI. So I'm constantly
right,
checking back, 3 months, 6 months, a year, even to see how those opportunities are shaping out. Because a lot of times those in-person things or anything event related takes a while to turn around, because that could be your first interaction with somebody. You shake their
right.
hand at a booth, for example, and that's their first time getting to know you, and it takes a while for those larger opportunities to come to fruition. But it is meaningful. I know, like, at GitLab, for example, I'm using it just because we were there
Right.
together, but um, we ended up doing this like last minute happy hour at AWS, and ended up being one of our most valuable investments and the largest ROI we had on anything we'd ever done. And I think it was, we had to pivot last minute. We lost our venue and we
Hmm.
ended up having to just book a suite, and it kind of ended up being this sort of like scavenger hunt feel. But because everybody was so invested in correcting what had happened and
Hmm.
making it a good experience for everybody, and we weren't just going by a general playbook that I think it's like, show up to dinner, we're going to scan your badge at the door, here's
Right.
2 drink tickets. It had totally
Right.
disrupted everything that was happening, so everybody was infinitely more engaged, and the audience noticed, and they were like, we just want to do
Right.
business with you. You're like, we don't even care, we're just so happy that this wasn't this cookie cutter thing. And I think that goes to,
Right.
when you are doing something, make it meaningful and try to delight people. And don't just go through the motions. Like you were saying, like, don't host an event to host an event. Figure out
Right.
what you want to do differently, what you want to do well, and focus in on those things. So, when
Hmm.
we did the GitLab user conference, for example, I was like, events never have anywhere to sit. I want people to be able to sit and have good conversations. And to me, that felt like that was that intimate piece, with having good food and places people could sit. And like, it wasn't about rushing through things, getting to the next talk. It was really about
Hmm.
like, this is a very special community, and we want our community members to be able to talk to each other.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, those little things, I mean, that kind of reminds me of, I mean, now it's called Open Infra Foundation. Back then it was OpenStack. One of the things, this is a very, like a, this sounds like a trivial thing. One of the reasons why I really like their conferences is that in the middle of like Expo, you'll see like a huge round tables with power plugs. So people are plugging in their laptop,
Yeah.
they can charge their devices. And once that ends up happening, because it's a round table, like you end up talking to people that you don't even know. Like you'll joke about, oh, go, I'm out of power again, and then you sort of connect. And then I thought that was really awesome. That was something that was very different back then. And like
Yeah.
you'll be walking around and you're kind of tired and you see these like a round table, they'll have coffee on the side. And I thought it was perfect. I mean, they sort of
Yeah.
knew what the developers really need and want. And then developers, they want a comfortable place to kind of hack if that's what they want to do,
Right.
right? So
Well, it's a
Yeah.
missed
yeah,
opportunity when you're walking through like an event conference center, and you see
yeah,
people sitting on the floor in like a huddled corner looking for an
right, right,
outlet. Right? Like, that's
yeah,
a missed opportunity to not have that
right,
situation where everybody can gather around that, because
yeah,
that's something, a basic thing everybody needs. Or I was at
right.
DEF CON a couple weeks ago, and they line con is a thing where everybody just has to wait in line. So you make it its own thing. And those are the
Mhm.
opportunities where you're actually making meaningful connections.
Right. Yeah. So, sorry, Daniel, like I may have interrupted you, but
So I think those kind of things are good, but it also depends a bit on like where in the conference it's located, because I've seen quite a few conferences where like they're like those really screaming over the top booths
Yeah.
with like loud music, loud lights and everything, and then like that's not a place you want to sit. You want to have like
No.
a little bit of
right,
like a place where you can actually talk with each other.
I've
right,
never understood that when people have those loud speakers in their booths. I'm like,
right,
wow, who is this for? What do you
right,
like? It goes back to intention. What are you trying to get at? Like, is this driving your goals forward? Is it to have a rave in your booth? If it is, then perfect. But
right.
if you're trying to have a
Yeah.
conversation, maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go,
I,
go
I
ahead.
really like the kind of booths where you just like really talk to someone, or like where they give it like a demonstration when it's like
Yeah.
meaningful, instead of like just some like really big decor and just only scanning leads to get the
Yeah.
highest number.
Exactly. One of my favorite booths we ever did is we had a s'mores making station. And to sit and make a s'more takes time, and it's a
Oh,
quiet
wow.
activity. And so
Yeah,
we had like people just roasting s'mores, and everybody was delighted. And it was some of the best conversations we've ever had, because we had this captive audience who doesn't like
right,
s'mores. And,
right.
it was like quiet and intimate and delicious.
Yeah,
Win, win, win.
there you go. And sugar always works. So,
Always works.
yeah, at
Yeah.
least for me. Yeah, I mean, we sort of started talking about it, like even for developers, just having a place where people can hack comfortably, charge their devices. What are, I mean, some of the other things that we need to consider when you're organizing an event for developers versus like a different audience? So obviously you're not necessarily going after leads, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
I think, developers, we all know, they kind of read through that. If they're just trying to scan my badge to build their sales leads, like the developers kind of see through that. But what are some of the things that we need to do to sound authentic for developers, I guess? So,
Yeah, I think it's rather focusing on, like I just said, you need to focus on what results you want to drive, but also what are they going to get out of it, rather than
mhm,
only being like, hey, our company needs to run something because we need to get leads. Really starting with the why would they come, and
mhm,
what am I going to bring to them? What is unique about this, and why would they care? And then my suggestion would also be like to be as specific as possible. So if you're very broad and trying to appeal to every audience, that's not going to work. Like that, then that's
mhm.
for nobody. So I'd rather focus on something small and meaningful for like whatever group you're trying to target, whatever developer group. Like don't lock it in every developer into one thing that is not going to work for you, and they're going to see that you're not speaking to them. It's for
Mm.
everybody, and it's not going to resonate.
Yeah, I also think with like very large conferences with like many like different kinds of topics, people just want to like directly see if it's interesting for them or not.
Mm-hmm.
Because like there might be a developer and not doing anything with databases and just want to pass along to the next stand, or might actually be interested in databases and then want to know what to target.
Yeah, I think all that comes down to your content as well. So if you can label the content of like what level is this for, who is this speaking to, so that people, you're not wasting people's time when they're trying to navigate through these kind of buzzwordy headlines. I think that's what like a trend you see is like talks that it's like you're reading a BuzzFeed article and you're like, what is I feel like this is going to play well on SEO or like clicks, but
Mhm.
it's not actually meaningful. So, finding that balance.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing worse than, I mean, I'm talking specifically about talks or sessions.
Hmm.
I mean, developer will decide to invest however much time to come to a session based on the abstract, right? And then the abstract is pretty far from what's being presented. There's nothing worse than that. I've seen that a couple of times in feedback, and I'm not saying like whether like the who knows what happened. Like maybe somebody who submitted a talk wasn't the presenter or something, but that's uh, you know when I'm presenting at a conference targeted for like community type or developer people, I really try to pay attention to what did I really propose and what got
Yeah.
accepted, right? So,
I think that's critical in terms
right,
of people just submit things that they think are going to get submitted, and then they build what the talk is from there. And maybe that's
right,
not the best model. I think one of the things that you can do to mitigate some of those things from a host perspective is holding speaker trainings. So rather than just assume
right,
because someone's been submitted and they've been accepted that they are an excellent speaker, everybody kind of thinks they can wing it. But preparation does matter, and like holding people accountable. And I think nobody wants to present a talk that's not well attended or not well presented. And so I've always done speaker prep and training. And it doesn't need, it can be like one session of just even to just do audio checks, run through their slides, make sure it's making sense. And I
mhm,
think it shows that you're taking it seriously and makes them take it a little more seriously. So it's a two-way street of holding everybody accountable to bring the best for the audience. And I think,
yeah.
the results speak for themselves.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of conferences do this. I mean, I believe including ours, like there's like a deadline to submit slides. I mean, this is
Mm-hmm.
especially critical for virtual events, but I mean, you're not trying to check up on people's work. I mean, that's not why you do it, but you want to make sure that it's appropriate. You're hitting the right,
Yeah.
right now. It's not in terms of marketing, but this is what, audience are looking for. So yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think that's a good point. It might feel overbearing for some presenters, but I think it's actually a good thing to do. Just having, you know, people actually work on the slides way before the event.
Right.
And yeah,
Well, it's also helpful
Yeah.
because if you're working with larger companies, they have sometimes a lot of compliance issues internally, and you
Right.
can't wait till the last minute when they are scrambling and like, I can't actually
Right.
present this. So it helps
Right.
from that perspective. But I also think you want speakers who are engaged and want to be there. And if they can't show up for one rehearsal or submit their slides, it's
Mhm.
probably not, the best fit.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Cool.
and even for the speakers that might not need a rehearsal, it doesn't really hurt that much. And it
No.
Mhm.
might just be to just check if the colors of the slide are like well
Yeah.
visible and text is readable, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Minor things like that. I mean, yeah. I mean, that goes to the audience experience, right? If the font's
Yeah.
way too small, for example, that seems minor, but it can get pretty annoying if you're sitting in the back of the room. So,
It's also helpful because then they have a face to put to your like company name. It's not
right.
anonymous anymore. And if they have any
Right.
issues the day of, they know who to go to. They feel supported. I think it reduces anxiety, even if sometimes it feels unnecessary if they're very practiced.
Right. Cool. I mean, next one is it's a little. I mean, not necessarily personal. I don't know what the right word is. I think half the time I ping you, Emily, it's about to ask you about swag. Like, I'm weighing the option for these
Yeah.
different kind of swag. Like, and I think a lot of the events that you organized that I really liked, their swag was pretty like interesting. It was kind of quirky, and it's not run of the mill like what some people call like it's not something you're going to throw in the trash as soon as you get back to your hotel room. So, how do you? What's sort of your process for figuring out if, first of all, if swag is even needed, and selecting the right one that that's going to have meaning for a lot of people. So, yeah.
Yeah, swag is an art form, I'd say.
Right.
I first do generally the suitcase test. Like at the end of the
Yeah.
day, after somebody grabbed a whole
Right.
bag of swag, is it going to make it back in their suitcase? If they've grabbed 10 t-shirts, probably not. They're probably going to drop some. And then the hotel staff is going to have your shirt, or it's going to end up in the trash.
Mhm.
So I focus either on things that are useful or, like you said, that delight, but they also still need to
Mhm.
be on brand and make sense for you. So, at GitLab, for example, we were kind of this one tool that fit everything. So we would often give out multi-tools, and they were these little kind of things that you kept in your wallet. They went through
Mhm.
TSA, no problem, but they were useful, and no one was going to throw it away because I still tighten my glasses all the time with that little tool, and I open
Right.
boxes with it daily, and I have
Yeah.
tons of them, but they're great. So like things like that make sense for your brand. Nobody's going to throw away. It'll last for a long time. It's not going to end up in a landfill. And if I can't think of something that's going to make sense like that, or I can't get something that's going to be meaningful, I'd rather not do swag. I'd rather do like a scan for donation or something. We've done,
Mhm.
Rails girls and things like that. And I think that also works well. So don't force something if you don't have to. I'm at a smaller, newer company, so we're actually doing shirts because this is kind of, there is the demand for that. And I don't think
Mhm.
people are going to throw them away because they've had very little interactions with our brand. And we do a very limited, another thing is like a limited run. And so if you only do something in smaller quantities rather than always giving out the same thing every time, people are more likely to keep it. And then I've also loved focusing on things that will give you instant recognition at an event. So we did, I think it was like Red Hat conference like years ago, and gave out these custom hats. We only had 100 of them, and they were fully branded in every way. And every like the rest of the week, everybody's wearing our hats. Everyone, it was so cool to see our brand just all over the show floor, and these custom
Nice.
hats that like were they were like orange, like everybody stood out
Yeah.
like a traffic cone, but they were very fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, things like that, like I care a lot about it. Like obviously it takes more effort to do things that are limited run, but I do think
Right.
it is worth it, and people will tweet at us with pictures of them. Like we used to do socks and we had a hashtag. So on the printing, the tag for the socks, it had a URL or a QR code and a hashtag, so people could instantly tweet it like with the second they put on their socks and things like that. Another thing I
Oh
kind of like
wow.
to do is sometimes we'll do things for kids because at the end of the day, people are going around the booth like, I need to bring something home to my kids. So
Right. Right.
weirdly,
Yeah.
children's things aimed at children have done well as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it takes putting more time to. I will say there's things that we have done that like kind of backfired. You don't want anything huge or heavy. So we
Right.
did ice packs once because we were in Austin, Texas in the summer, and it was
Right.
so
Right.
hot. And
Right.
they were delightful, and I think we kept them in a cooler with beer, and it made sense. But at the same time, I had tons of boxes of them, and they were like carrying around bricks. And
Oh wow.
so,
Yeah.
things like that, you kind of have to think about, if it doesn't all go, how am I going to store this? How am I going to transport this? So those are also things I think about. Like, I try to go for things that are as small as possible for my own
Cool.
sanity and lifting my back.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to ship things, best to have things
Hmm.
without batteries.
Oh
Exactly.
yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Tech is so hard too because people are so specific, and like batteries and things like that just kind of, especially if you're going internationally, like get caught up in customs easily. So you got to think about those things as well.
Yeah. I mean, one of the more popular things in the US, I don't know if this is still the case. I mean, Emily can confirm, are cell phone chargers, little cell phone charging sticks, right?
Yeah.
But then I learned, like, we shipped it to Korea, it got stuck in customs for like a week. So it
Yeah.
never, it never showed up, right? So yeah, that's a good point. Lesson learned. But
Yeah.
Yeah,
When we would do, oh, sorry, go.
we had the same situation with an event in the UK. So we were trying to ship it from Europe to the UK, and because of Brexit, there's more checks, and
right.
I think it never arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing's worse than when it doesn't arrive. But no,
Right.
when we would do larger events internationally, we would source specifically for things like when we did the Prague thing, we sourced a company that only did things in Prague. And that was
Oh,
the only
okay.
way we were going to get it there without paying thousands in
Right.
customs. So,
Yep. Yep.
well, sometimes
But
it takes more work, but it's
right.
worth it to not be on the phone with UPS.
or
Yeah,
customs, which is
yeah,
even worse.
exactly.
But cool. So yeah, I think I brought this up earlier. I mean, I think, like, COVID hit us while Emily, you and I were both at GitLab, and I think I mentioned this to you a while ago because I thought, like, events were like reaching sort of a bubble in terms of like expenses, amount of events before COVID, and then the world kind of shifted. And I mean, obviously, we're on the other side of the pandemic, and I'm thinking, has a pandemic changed events, or are we doing the same thing over and over again, back to the pre-COVID days? Like, wanted to get your thoughts on that, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I thought it was going to change things dramatically. It seemed like the
Hmm.
chance, like you were saying, we'd reach this peak of, I don't know, like when I went to, so the pandemic, happened in early spring of 2020. And I just remember going to AWS reInvent the right before, and I just felt like cattle the whole time. And you
Hmm.
can't even make it to a talk because you can't transport to 5 different hotels. You can't be everywhere you need to be. And
Hmm.
like half of the struggle is just getting from place to place, and you're in a huge expo hall, and every company looks the same. And so I thought, and like there's so many issues with sustainability and diversity and inclusion, and it seemed like this was the chance to make big changes. I don't necessarily know if those things came to fruition. I think, events budgets were some of the first things that were cut, and teams. And I felt that like very deeply, specifically, like I had to lay off most of my team after the pandemic happened. And, we were able to pivot to virtual events, but I do think people got a little cautious in terms of like, were their jobs safe? They just like kind of went back to these things that were tried and true. And as soon as the world opened up, people were exhausted, and we just kind of went back to like the way things were. I do like that there's become more room for virtual happenings, and that has allowed, I think, more accessibility in a lot of ways. So
Hmm.
when COVID happened, we had to switch our in-person event to virtual, and we were able to get thousands and thousands more of attendees in so many different countries, and none of that would have ever been possible. And I think we would have invested so heavily in the in-person experience rather than that, like I was saying, that reusable content piece that allowed way more people to benefit from this. It's hard to say if it drove the same results because everything was way more distributed, but we were able to, I think, live up to a good brand promise of being, that remote life and that remote piece, and that being accessible globally, which was nice. But generally, in terms of like, have events substantially changed, I haven't seen huge changes. I still go to the show floor and everything looks and feels the same. Maybe there's a little more hand sanitizer.
Right.
But yeah, I'm still waiting for like big changes to happen. I do think people are more cautious with their budgets now, more skeptical of
Hmm.
events, so it's been harder for that just like industry as a whole. So we'll see what happens. I think there's still time and room for disruption.
Yeah. I mean, I think like virtual only events have become a little bit more normalized, which is a good
Yeah,
thing. I mean, people don't roll their eyes when they see a virtual, like a 3 day virtual event. I guess what I was hoping for, maybe this is the issue. Like I was hoping to see more hybrid type of events where you have both
yeah,
virtual and in person going at the same time, and to a point where what used to be 4 day events could be done in 3 days in person in Houston, Texas, for example. But you have
yeah,
1 day of content virtually, so you can have more people participate. But I don't see that as much. I mean, Daniel, you and I are both big fans of FOSDEM. I think FOSDEM are actually doing that. They have like one track I went to actually last year. Morning in Europe was all virtual, and
yeah.
the afternoon was like all in person in that classroom. I think it was like a green energy track or whatever
Hmm.
the name of the dev room is. So I thought that was kind of cool. So you allow people to sort of participate from other parts of the world, but I don't think I've seen that as much as I was hoping, but
Yeah,
Yeah, I think sorry, the issue is like you're sort of stealing your own audience because as soon as you
mhm,
make it virtual, then the people are tempted not to go. So you have to find that
yeah,
exact perfect. It's sort of like doing a pricing model. Like, how do you not get people to get your lower tier pricing with if it has amazing features and you can get similar
mhm,
experience? So how do you
yeah,
find that perfect fit?
right,
yeah. And I think the thing with hybrid events is also that like the quality of the online recordings need to be really good
Yeah,
because
right,
like if people are just like watching like a 10-minute nothingness before it actually starts and then
true.
like
right.
can't
That's true.
understand all the questions, then that's not
Right,
great. I think
Yeah.
Fosdem has been doing quite a good job there by just recording the sessions, both the slides and the video of the speaker,
right.
and good quality audio. So I think that really
Yeah,
helps.
There is a chance it ends up being doubly expensive doing that because it is
that's
not
true.
cheap
Yeah,
to do quality video.
Oh yeah.
right.
Um, so that's the hard part.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's I think we're sort of been back to normal maybe for only about 15 months now in terms of like events. So who knows, like a year from now, we might be having a different conversation. Really appreciate your time, Emily. Just a couple more questions. I mean,
Yeah.
one is obviously, I mean, including our event next week at the HAP Summit, a lot of our audience members will be, or attendees will be developers. And we always had this issue. Like I've been working a lot with obviously open source community members and developers. A lot of times, I mean, I don't mean to stereotype. I think a lot of people struggle with being somewhat of an introvert. You're not in your desk coding all day, so you're sort of not in your natural environment. Like, what advice do you have for attendees to get the most out of events? I mean, you're out of the office. What are the ways that typically developer audience could think about to get more
Yeah.
out of the events? Like,
I I would say preparation is key and
mhm,
don't put too much pressure on yourself to do everything. So I know I was reading a lot of advice about, DEF CON, which was like a month ago, and it was like figure out like that one thing you really want to do in that day. Are you really determined to go to some specific lunch? Are you determined to go to some specific talk? And make sure that happens for you and like have a plan of how you're going to get there and then maybe just let the rest happen organically because sometimes that is the best thing about being in person is like not over prescribing what you need to do. I'd also say,
mhm,
be as present as possible. Like if you are going to fly somewhere, like go be there. Don't be answering your work emails. Like obviously that needs to happen sometimes, but then that kind of takes away from what could be your in-person experience. But yeah, I think just preparation is key. If there are people you want to meet, figure out how you're gonna do that in advance. Sometimes I like to schedule dinners in advance with like old coworkers so I can make sure I get to see them and don't try to do that on site because it's probably not going to happen. You're probably going to be at opposite sides of the venue or the city or
right,
whatever it is. So yeah, just putting a little pre-work, you'll get a lot more out of it. And then obviously hydrate, comfortable shoes, take care of
Right.
yourself. That's probably the
Yeah.
hardest part.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you're right. It's easy to overdo it. That's why a lot of people come back with come back from like huge events from Vegas with, I mean, hopefully it's not COVID, but a lot of people
Yeah.
get sick the week following the event. But yeah, I mean, I think like for me, like it really depends. I mean, I'm a bit of an introvert myself, like because like one of the things I struggled with for a long time was actually asking questions at the end of the session because I feel
Mm,
like I'm probably the only one who's stupid enough not to know this answer. And but what I would do is, I would kind of cheat. I would wait until the end, and then I would sort of catch the speaker in the hallway because
yeah,
it
that's
feels like
perfect.
more one on one, and I don't feel as embarrassed. But then I'll find out it's actually people walking by, they'll say, "Oh, I was kind of curious about that too." So it took me a while to sort of get over that, but having the courage to sort of introduce yourself to speakers, that's um, I think I think that's something that people get comfortable over time. It's you're not.
Yeah.
I mean, even to this day, like depending on the speaker, I might be intimidated, and because it's
Yeah. Even
you
I get
know
shy for sure.
right.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like a very well-known person in Ruby community, and then yeah, I'm not even really a developer anymore, and I'm trying to ask questions about Ruby, and I feel like out of place. So
Yeah. I mean, even
yeah,
I've like emailed people after the fact and just thanked them for their talk and follow up with
yeah,
questions. And, that just shows you were paying attention and grateful. Like, no one's going to be upset about that. They want to
right,
talk about and educate you. So
right,
I know
right.
it's never too late either. So
Yeah,
I think, that's great too. Like, I mean, it's people are there to meet people and to engage with like minds, and I don't think there are stupid questions. People love being
right,
asked about what they do and what they're experts in. So I love that.
cool. And what about you, Daniel? Any tips for maybe people that haven't attended a lot of events before? Like,
Um, just like start conversations with like speakers with other people.
yeah,
Um, like it's easy to just get out of a conversation if like one of the two parties isn't interested, and
right.
it just makes the whole like event such more interesting.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's actually the key benefit of in-person event. I mean, people call them hallway tracks, right? It's a hallway conversation that's, you'll get a lot out of it, like in between talks. So, um, cool. All right. So, thank you, Emily, for going through going through our questions here. One last question that we have for all of our guests. I mean, you're in this
Perfect.
wonderful town of Austin, Texas, or that's where you spend most of your time.
Hmm.
I mean, I've only been there for work. I mean, I've probably been there like a 5 or 6 times. It's always been conferences and always had a great time. But obviously, I don't know anything about Austin. I mean, make a plan of actually vacationing there. But what are things about Austin, Texas that people may not know about? Like, yeah.
Yeah, so I was the same. I
Uh-huh.
first came to Austin for work and fell in love with it, but I think I'd only went to the convention center in Rainy Street, which is not
Right.
where I don't go anymore, now that I live here. And one of
Yeah.
my favorite things about Austin and something that's delighted me is it's just way greener than I ever thought and has so much more like water activities. And so one of my
Okay.
favorite places is in Zilker Park. It's Barton Springs Pool, and it's the largest natural swimming pool in the nation. And
Oh,
it's
wow.
incredible. It's 3 acres big. You can get in for free depending on the hours of the day. And given how hot it is here, swimming is very top of mind, and I'm sure it's very
Right.
busy right now. But it's gorgeous. There's amazing aerial views. I would suggest looking it up. It's just like it has a diving board. It's just natural pool. It's the same temperature year round, and it's always
Nice.
crystal clear because it's from a natural spring, and it's a delight. And if you ever have time, I would recommend just like getting in a dip there because it's a very special place, and it's not somewhere you'd normally go, unless you're really a local.
Right. Cool.
And it's
Sounds
open
great.
late. You can go at like 10 at night. That's the best night swimming.
All right. Sounds great. So, yeah, I've always, I mean, it's been years since I've been there, but I've always had a good. That's one city that I never minded going to for
Yeah.
conference. So cool. All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, this was
And
fun.
then
Thank you.
yeah, I'm sure we'll talk again. All right. Thanks everyone. We'll see you in the next episode.